as more and more people rely on AI, your supply over here of AI is going up. Your demand is going to be more and more for people who can understand and utilize empathy. It's almost going to be like a craftsman kind of thing where the leaders who really can are going to be in demand. So if you're thinking ahead, I would want to be on the side that's going to be in demand.
Welcome to the Mid-Game Mindset. Join us as we dive into the pivotal moments that shape today's top sales and marketing leaders, RevOps innovators, and entrepreneurs. This is where grit meets growth and the game changes for good. If you find value in this conversation, be sure to share it with another growth leader who would enjoy it. And now, let's get to the show. Welcome to the Mid-Game Mindset. I'm your host, Rich Bishop, and today's guest is Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. We connected through a mutual friend, Chase and Forehand, when I was on their podcast, Time to Change, just a couple of months ago. We've recently had some really good conversations around empathy and leadership, and I thought it would be really good to use that as a connecting point to some of the AI and technology conversations that we've been having on the show lately, because that's really the offset of the technology and the cold things that are out there that frankly are taking over the sales and marketing space right now. So wanted to make sure we can focus on the people aspect of things and where empathy comes into play. So Dr. Melissa is a TEDx speaker. She's a coach. She's the author of the book called The Empathic Leader. She's taken her frameworks to the stages of Oxford and Cambridge and really on the forward edge of where human empathy and connection comes into play. So Dr. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Rich. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. And I touched on a couple of the highlights. I'd love to hear a little bit more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because it's not like, it's not like when someone is asked in kindergarten, what do you want to be when you grow up? They say, oh, I'm going to study empathy. It's not really what happens. And I kind of stumbled into it too. I was a musician. I loved what I did. I got to do some really cool stuff. I got to play with Ray Charles. I got to play with Mannheim Steamroller. I got to tour Rome as a soloist, that kind of thing. But I really like food, shelter, and clothing. And sometimes being a gigging musician is a little unstable. So I got my first doctorate and started teaching. But the problem was the situation I was in was so incredibly toxic. It was just, the department I was in was horrible. There was a lot of yelling. There was a lot of screaming. There was a lot of command and control leadership, like to the extreme. There were people that shouldn't have been there doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. There were assaults involved, both me and students. And it was ugly. And by the end of it, I had to just leave. I had to walk away, which was hard because that's really all I had known was music. That's what I had done my whole life. And I didn't really know what I was going to do after that. So I was doing some consulting work with my husband. And the thing is, I kept seeing the same patterns, that same inability of people to connect with other people, watching businesses lose employees and profit and productivity because of a lack of connection between humans. And I was like, okay, there's something much bigger going on here that I'm missing. Because the more I was talking to people and the more I'm collecting information, not on purpose, just you're talking to people and you're learning. It's like, this is huge. This is symptomatic of something really massive. So I decided that that's what I wanted to study because I think both, on a smaller scale within leadership and business, but on a larger scale within our society, we're missing some of this. And if we don't start figuring it out, we're going to be in for a world of hurt.
Yeah. And I'm sorry that you had to go through all of that. But it is interesting to see that the challenges that people go through end up kind of shaping their interests, desires, and expertise, frankly. And in this matter, it really kind of led you in that path. Now, I know that to go through something like that, it does instill this feeling of empathy when you've had to go through some of those tough times. I think we had talked offline, and I've mentioned on other podcasts before some of the things that I had gone through that kind of got me there, which, by the way, does not compare at all to what you were just describing, but it did instill in me a sense of empathy and understanding where the little guy is coming from, right? Or where that other person is coming from, being able to put myself in their shoes. Does somebody have to go through something real tough in order to have that? Or are there people out there that naturally have that sense of connection or empathy with others?
It seems to be kind of a half and half sort of thing. So empathy, the research says there is a biological basis for it, that there is something that we are instilled with from birth, most of us. There are a few who aren't. And those fall into the dark triad. So that's psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, and Machiavellians. So there's that tells you what it looks like when you don't have empathy. Right there, I think that's very telling. So most of us, we do have it, but for some reason, for those of us who have had hard things happen, especially developmentally in childhood, it does seem to instill that ability to, I don't even want to say ability, it's more like curiosity. What is going on with the other person? What is going on in the other person's mind? And part of it seems to be defensive. Because if you're in that situation where you're constantly trying to smell the air to figure out what's going to happen next, knowing that other person's perspective could be the thing that saves you, whether it's a abusive household or, like with your story with bullying in schools or with mine dealing with a toxic workplace, that ability to read the room and see the perspective of the other person can actually help protect you from danger. So there's a certain amount of that. Empathy is really, it's this really fascinating thing because it's biological, but no, it's really not. And you can learn it, but some of it is natural, and it's really super cool when you get down into it.
Yeah, definitely a mix, right, of where it actually comes from. Now, I'd love to get your take on, I've got 2 teenage girls, obviously growing up in the tech age, in the tech industry. I've had Steven Sopko on recently, and we've had a number of conversations around AI and technology and how that's evolving into the sales process itself. But even outside of business, the technology and social media and others, I'm seeing a lack of empathy on one side, but then empathy almost as a badge of honor, or, hey, look at me, I have empathy kind of view. There's almost like 2 extremes developing. Are you seeing something similar?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the interesting thing is that I'm not sure how much, either one has to do with empathy. So there's one researcher out there, her name is Jean Twenge, and she actually spends a lot of time looking at kids and social media and how all this comes down. And she's finding in her research that through the use of social media and getting kind of this main character syndrome, right? Because if you're on social media, you're in the spotlight, that the rise of narcissism in our society is a little bit scary in the younger generation. And it's because they don't necessarily understand what empathy is or how to use it. And it's because they're not looking at anybody else's perspective. They're in the spotlight. Mm-hmm. Well, if they're not taught, how do they know? And the other side of this, like you're talking about, let's put empathy in our mission, vision, and values. We're not actually going to do it, but we're going to put it there. It's this performative empathy aspect, right? The look at me. There was a really famous one, I don't remember, a couple years ago now, where there was a CEO and he was on social media and he's like crying because he's having to lay people off, and he's, just like sobbing into the camera. And it's like, okay, that's not empathy. That is performative empathy, and they're not the same thing. So let's back this up and actually define what this is, shall we?
Yeah. So that's a good segue. What is empathy then?
Empathy is the ability to take the perspective of the other person, period. We have this idea that it's about feelings, the I feel what you feel. And that's part of it. That's one kind, but there's 43 definitions of empathy. And feelings are only part of it. There's cognitive empathy, which means I logically understand what you feel. I just don't feel anything. There's somatic empathy, which is where you actually feel in your body, like if another person's feeling pain and you feel like a ghost pain on your own. There's empathy within and around nature. There's empathy between different species. If you have a dog and you know what that dog is feeling, well, or, if it's hurting or even if it's thirsty, and people that have animals, they do talk about that. So really, there's all these different definitions, but at the end of the day, every single one of them is about being able to take the perspective of the other. And feelings are part of it, but they're actually a really small part of it.
And when does empathy get taken too far? I think you made mention of the CEO. Like, where is that line? Because empathy can be a strength, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially in a leader, somebody that's growing a company, building a culture, having empathy for the people around you, for the company that you're growing is a very positive thing when it's done right. But then there's also when decisions need to be made in a company, or, somebody isn't holding up their end of the bargain and you need to make a decision to go in a different direction. Sometimes having too much empathy can kind of hold you back from being able to make those decisions. Where does that line between constructive empathy and maybe destructive empathy, if that's the right way to think about it, where is that line?
Empathy. So empathy in and of itself, there's no action. So empathy is just being in that place with the other person, whether it's in feeling or cognitively or whatever. Empathy becomes destructive when it means that your outcomes are destructive. Now, understanding that empathy does not have any action. So whatever outcomes are happening, that's not empathy. That could be misplaced compassion, which is the action component. That could be somebody being a doormat and not having boundaries and saying that's empathy, which it's not. That could be somebody mixing up the difference between being nice and being kind. Nice is a social construct. Nice is, what we do to get through comfortably in society. It basically makes everybody comfortable, but it doesn't actually give you the best outcome. Kindness is where you actually are trying to give the best outcome to you and the other person and the organization, because you're right. You have to think these are businesses. They're made to be run. If they're run into the ground, it's no good. So the second empathy moves out of kindness and into being nice, I'm going to be nice. I'm going to give everybody great performance reviews, even though they haven't earned them. It doesn't matter that I'm also taking away their ability to grow and do better. That's not kind, but that's very nice because there's no conflict. Well, that's not empathy. That's being a doormat. One of the things we're hearing right now out in society is this idea of suicidal empathy, which that would be Elon Musk. And what he's talking about specifically is how, as a country, we have so much of whatever he defines as empathy that we allow lots of different people in from lots of different countries that aren't necessarily helping us, in his view, especially our bottom line. And because of this, our country isn't doing as well. Well, number one, what he's talking about isn't empathy. He's talking about being a doormat. And number two, I don't see how taking the other person's perspective can even sort of kind of be equated to what his definition of empathy is. Because I don't think just taking someone else's perspective is going to be the thing that's going to naturally lead to rolling over to the point that we become suicidal as a nation.
Ooh, okay. So this is hitting something for me, because there's always been this concept, and sorry, trying to form the question here as I'm thinking through this, because so many thoughts are running through my mind. But as we look at just in the past, there's always been this concept of the hard thing to do is usually the right thing to do, or the inverse of that, right? The right thing to do is usually the hard thing to do. And I wonder if empathy, to the extent that it was being used to create the lack of action or create the becoming a doormat, that sort of concept, if that almost is using empathy as an excuse for doing the easy thing and not doing the right thing.
I dropped the mic. We can stop the episode right there. That's right. Yeah.
Is that what it comes down to, you think?
Yeah, it's the same as having a leader who's like, oh, I have too much empathy, so I allow this person to slide by even though they're actually creating trouble with the rest of my team, or I don't want to give bad reviews, or I don't want to tell this person it's time to leave, even though it would be in that other person's best interest to be somewhere where they could thrive and they could grow. But it's this excuse of, oh, I just have too much empathy. No, that's not empathy. That's being a doormat. Having empathy does not mean you don't have boundaries. And in fact, if you have empathy, you need to have very strong boundaries, because you need to know exactly where you come down. So, yeah, I would absolutely agree with that.
being firm in what you stand for, but being able to be empathic, right? And
Right.
have those conversations in a way that I think you talked about kindness, right? Just in a way that you still are moving in the right direction, but maybe there's a difference here, or maybe you need to step up a little bit because you're not holding your end of the bargain, whatever that happens to be, but being able to have that boundary and that line for where we go.
Right. And I mean, it can even be as far as, that nice, kind dichotomy is really a big part of it, because empathy isn't always very nice, but it's always kind. If you have an employee and it's really obvious, they're just miserable. They're burnt out. They don't want to do their job. They don't want to be there, but they're hanging on. Keeping them in that position isn't doing them any favors, and it isn't helping the organization. It isn't helping the morale of everybody else. That's the other thing. While you're, saying you're having so much empathy for this person, what about empathy for the rest of the team that's having to put up with this and deal with this every single day? True kindness would be saying, look, this is not working for you. This is not working for us. Let's find a different solution, even if that means maybe I can help you polish off your resume and see what we can find for you, because you're not happy in this. We're not happy in this. Nobody's happy in this. So let's do the kindest thing possible here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the areas where I've spent quite a bit of time speaking and working with clients and companies that I've been a part of in the past is the hiring process early on. You talked about having the boundaries, and we can add probably frameworks to that, where there are certain frameworks for how we want to build this organization. And we're really clear bringing people in with who is a good fit from a cultural perspective, not just the bullet points on their resume, but who they are as a person, what they bring to the table, how they contribute to the team. And when we're clear about that up front, it becomes a much easier conversation if they are not living up to those standards, to say, okay, hey, either you need to step up to these standards that we agreed upon previously, or we'll help you find another place to go, right? Sometimes that's where that comes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's empathy to the core, because you're taking that person's perspective by saying, how can I be clear about this so that they know what they're getting into? They know exactly what they're about, because clarity is kindness, right? I mean, if you're doing this stuff where you're, actually talking about culture and how we bring people in, getting clear on that is a kindness, because people are going to self-select out if they're like, yeah, this isn't my bag. This isn't what I want. And like you said, then when things come up later, you can say, yeah, so we do need to have a discussion about this because you knew this coming in. And so either you can be with us, or we can try to find you a place where you're going to be happier, because this obviously isn't making anybody happy.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, too many people are willing to stay in that unhappy place or that unfulfilling place for too long for a number of other reasons. But you're right. At the end of the day, it's more kind to help find the right place when that's the case, right? Ultimately, if you're here, we want you to be here. There's a reason why you're here, and we want to be able to build this together. So, that's the other side of the coin, I guess.
Yes. Well, and also by taking their perspective, you can actually, when you can name their outcome, you know what their perspective is, what their outcomes are. So when you see problems, you can say, okay, so is their outcome, the outcome that they have, if I'm looking at this through their eyes, is this a breakdown because they're lazy, they don't want to do their job, they're just, whatever? Or is there something else at play here? Is their outcome actually that they're afraid of getting yelled at if they don't get this done? Is their outcome actually that they're like so ambitious about this project that they're almost frozen with it? Let me take their perspective. What is their outcome? Because once you can name that outcome, you can reverse engineer it so that your outcome and their outcome align. And now you've got entire teams working towards the same outcome, instead of just, obviously they want to do this for the glory of the company. Well, no, probably not. And quite frankly, probably neither do the leaders if you want to get right down to it. So.
Yep. Absolutely. And you're hitting on something important there too, which I think is the assumptions or the judgments that we make without taking the time to understand where the other person is coming from. And that shows up in a number of different areas of life, in building a business, in sales, and in trying to sell your product or service, right? Also within the family, trying to raise a family and the things that the kids go through on a regular basis. So from a company perspective, a leader in a company, let's just say that they're an executive, and maybe there are certain assumptions that are made or judgments that are made. How does one that's in that position get to the point where they can look at the other person's view and take that the empathic route with a decision that's being made, instead of maybe what has been done before, whether it's a decision made by spreadsheet and not talking to people, or maybe there are some judgments being made or assumptions being made about the other person's perspective? How do they bridge that gap and make that transition?
So there's two parts to that, I think. The first is just in recognizing that this is a skill, and as a skill, maybe there's a gap there, and it's a skill you can actually work on. With my clients, I pull out something that's called the Johari window. And it looks like a window pane, and it's a way of taking the other person's perspective. If you're just not used to doing it, right? I mean, if you're not used to typing, you're not going to be good at it at first. Same reason watching little kids learn to walk. They're not good at it at first because it's a skill they haven't developed. So it's a means of developing the skill. It's what you know, what you don't know, what they know, what they don't know. That's what's in the 4 windows. So you could actually sit down with them and say, okay, so let's discuss this. What is this that I think I know that I don't know? What is this that you think you know about me in this situation that maybe we're crossing lines here? And actually be able to clarify this and say, yes, this is what's really going on. There's that actual skill-based thing. The other side of that people tend to forget is, quite simply, have you asked? Did you ask what the perspective is? Have you taken the time to be seen around enough? Have you built your know, like, and trust factor enough that if you go up to an employee and say, hey, can you just give me your point of view on this, that they're going to give you an honest answer? And that does mean, coming out and leading from the front, not only coming out of the office when there's bad news, not only hitting the factory floor when there's something really bad going down, but actually being around and available. And I mean, these are leaders. They don't have time to do, coffee clatch, and totally they shouldn't. They're busy doing leader things. But there's a way to be seen and known and trusted and still get done what you need to. And I would actually say it's actually more efficient, because now if I go to my employee and I say, can you help me with this? We tried this change initiative before where we brought in this new platform, and it failed miserably. And now we're talking about doing that again, but I really need to understand the other side of this so we can make sure that this is successful this time. And I'll get an honest answer, instead of someone going, oh my goodness, you're out of your office. Oh,
Yeah, especially it's still a very remote world today, right? I know there are a lot of companies that are moving back full-time into the office, but there are a lot of companies that have taken advantage of the fact that you can have this amazing talent spread out throughout the country or throughout the world and be able to really access the highest level of talent. It takes much more purpose, and it's a decision to be able to have those conversations, right? Because it's not cooler talk to be able to have that kind of conversation anymore when everybody's across the country from one another. You've got to be really intentional with how you do it, whether it's over Slack or whether Zoom, whatever the method is. But to be able to gather that information, I found that the best change management happens when you've got the perspective of the person that's closest to the front lines.
Yep, because they're the ones that are going to have to actually use it. Sometimes we get this idea that we're going to have this new whiz-bang solution, like talking about AI. And really, when you're in a leadership position, you're wanting things to do better. You're wanting them to be more efficient. You're wanting this as kind of a gift to your people. But if you're not using it, and you're not the one on the front lines actually making it happen, you may not understand everything that goes into it. Plus, we deal with a lot of change fatigue right now because of just the onslaught of AI and tech and data and all of this other stuff. So if your people are just not in a position to do one more change right now, no matter how cool this thing is, it's not going to work.
Yeah. That side of it, I think, is a topic for another day, but one that we could definitely get into, the change fatigue and just how quickly things are moving, because there is this offset of things are moving so quickly that you have to be on top of what's happening, or else you could potentially be left behind. But then there's that change fatigue factor. It's just because the pace is so fast right now. And frankly, I don't see it stopping anytime soon. So yeah, that one will be an interesting one for us to get into at another time, I think.
Absolutely. Because I think you're right. I don't think it's going to stop.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the decisions that are made, having some of those conversations, we talk about AI. AI has really come into play, especially on the marketing and sales side. I get, God, 3, 4, 5 LinkedIn notifications a day that are clearly bots or automations on the other side. I just decline, right? Phone calls, same thing, right? It's becoming harder and harder to kind of get through the noise because there is so much noise that's out there. But for our marketing and sales leaders, where does empathy play a role, and where does it enter with all of the tech that's proliferating right now?
So first thing, just AI, as far as I'm concerned, is an incredible tool. I mean, it's fantastic. You can do so much with it. But if you don't take the perspective of the other person first, that's exactly what you're doing, is creating more noise. And after a while, I mean, I'm already seeing articles about that with AI fatigue. And what is it, like 70% of AI initiatives that have been put in place since it came out in 2022 have failed. And it's because people are just like throwing this in there without understanding the perspective of the people it should be serving. So the first thing to keep in mind is that this is a tool. This is not a friend. This is not a patch-all solution. This is not, your best buddy that you can talk to. This is a tool. And because it's a tool, it does not have empathy, not any more than a hammer does. You cannot expect a hammer to have empathy, and AI doesn't either, because it cannot take the perspective of the other person. It can mimic it. It can really make it look good, which is why we have people now that are suffering from things like psychosis because they're going to AI as a therapist. But it doesn't have it. It just doesn't, at least not the way it is now. So as people are putting this in and are like so excited to have it, you've got to start with the perspective of the other person. And it doesn't matter if that's your employee. It doesn't matter if that's your customer base. It doesn't matter if that's your board of directors. Because if this incredible tool does not serve these people and you haven't taken their perspective well enough to know it, it's going to be yet another change initiative that's going to fail.
Yeah, that's happening a lot for sure. And I think I had recently read that 70% number. Completely agree. There's a bunch of experimentation that's taking place under the guise of transformation. But you don't know, or a lot of these companies and people haven't had the expertise to know what coming out on the other side actually looks like. They think they may know, so it becomes an experiment that they want to make this transformation. But because of what you were just saying there, you've got to understand the impact to the person on the other side. And when you're talking about sales and marketing, yeah, there's great tools that are out there, but at the end of the day, it's still built on trust, right? Those decisions to purchase, the decisions to make partnerships are built on trust. Yeah. So where does empathy come into play in that trust building exercise from a sales leader or a marketing leader point of view?
Well, if I'm actually taking the time to understand your perspective, and again, it doesn't matter if it's your employees, it doesn't matter if it's your customers, it doesn't matter, because it's still people to people, no matter what. If I'm taking that time to understand where you're coming from, I'm going to be better able to serve you, right? As a leader, I'm going to be able to come in and say, okay, I understand that this is what you need, and this is why you need it, and this is the situation that has given rise to this, which is going to create that trust. Because as an employee, say, I'm not going to assume that you're just using me as a cog until you ring me out. I'm going to be like, okay, I understand we're going through some pretty difficult times right now, but they seem to understand my perspective that this isn't working out very well right now, that I need to be able to change my behavior to do X, Y, and Z, and I can trust them to keep their side of the things as well, as opposed to just, nameless, faceless, don't know you. AI has said this is your perspective. I haven't actually asked you, but that's what it said. Why trust that? There's no reason to, you know?
Yeah,
It's
I think
that human
from
thing.
it is.
Sorry.
No, you're spot on. I think that human aspect of this is going to continue to be the deciding factor, right? At the end of the day, it is a human deciding, even if they empower an AI bot in the future to make those purchasing decisions for themselves, the one to execute on that and to put the parameters in place is the person on the other side. So at a certain point, right, it comes down to the relationship that you have as a company or as an individual with those people, with your partners, with your customers, right? And how do you execute on that? I have found that those tools are very helpful for providing some of those perspectives, right? And what are the possible scenarios? But you hit on something, confirm it before you make the assumption that what that tool is telling you, Claude or Chat GPT, whatever, is their perspective. You've got to confirm it because you don't necessarily know what that person on the other side is truly going through.
Right. Exactly. And then another way to look at it too, I think, is in terms of supply and demand, right? Because now they're talking about how like 60% of what's on the internet is AI generated. Well, if AI is pulling from large databases like the internet to be able to give you these decisions, and it's pulling from itself, now we're into something cyclic. I mean, you're going to be getting a major echo chamber. But as more and more people rely on AI, right, and the scale tips, and people are like, this is what's going to help me make my decisions, this is what's going to do, your supply over here of AI is going up. Your demand is going to be more and more for people who can understand and utilize empathy. It's almost going to be like a craftsman kind of thing where the leaders who really can are going to be in demand because they're not going to have the same supply. So if you're thinking ahead and you're looking ahead at some of what AI and big tech are bringing, I would want to be on the side that's going to be in demand.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And you talked about it being a tool, right? It's knowing when it's a tool and how to use it as a tool, but don't lose the human aspect of this, of how you manage, how you lead, how you sell, fill in the blank here, right? Whatever it is that you do, how is that a tool to help you to execute your goals?
Exactly. You know, and the more you keep that in your forefront as everybody else is kind of doing other things, the more you're going to be in line to be that supercharged leader of the next 20 years. So, I mean, why not align yourself with what's coming? So
speaking of what's coming, I know you've got the doctorate hopefully coming up here, crossing fingers. As you continue on with the study of empathy and being able to work with others on that, what do you see as some of the coming challenges in the next 5 to 10 years, kind of in that space when it comes to leadership?
A lot of it is going to be really understanding the perspective of these generations that are coming in and coming up, because we're already hearing it, right? That millennials are obviously like this and Gen Z is obviously like this and they don't want to work, and really understanding that from their perspective, you know, we have these generations that are coming up in a time that is unprecedented. They're worried that they've, you know, gone to college or done all the right stuff and it's all going to be taken by AI. They're watching these companies where maybe there isn't a lot of loyalty and people bounce from job to job to job because that's kind of where we're at right now. You know, they almost expect leaders that are going to look at them as a cog instead of as a person. Whereas, you know, research has shown that these generations are more about loyalty and are really driven towards social good and interpersonal relationships. So the more people can take the perspective of these generations, the more they're going to be able to align their goals, right? Name their outcome. Now we're going to align our goals so that we're going in the same direction and really be able to focus them on what's coming next, as opposed to this constant friction that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, there is just because, again, of the pace of change, the the Gen Xers, right? That you get the baby boomers that are leaving the workplace here slowly and eventually over time. You've got the Gen Xers, you've got I'll call them the Zennials, that group that's in between the Gen X and the Millennials. They're not fully in either one of those two camps, right? And then from there, the technology just accelerated exponentially, right? And so you've got these major gaps between the different generations that are in the workplace. How does empathy play out with some of those generational differences as you see them today?
Because it allows you to actually look at people on a human to human basis instead of saying, oh, thus and so is a boomer and all boomers don't understand technology and just, they're old and crusty, or all Gen Zs don't want to work and are too busy on their phones, or whatever. All Gen Xers don't care. That's me. Here I am, I'm talking about empathy, and yet all Gen Xers are kind of like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. But by actually being able to take that human to human route, I can actually relate to people on a human to human level, because to stereotype someone in terms of what their generation is ridiculous. The whole point, like you said, is that we've come into this with completely different views on technology. And Jean Twenge, same person, she's written books on that, how the real generational divide isn't chronological, it's our relationship with technology. Well, if you can take the other person's perspective and say, you know what, this person doesn't understand what it is to live in a world where they're not attached to their phone all the time, not for any other reason than because they've got that information at their fingertips 24/7. That's a very different point of view than someone who was alive when the first computers came online and filled entire office buildings, and being able to bring that together and say, these are two very different point of views. And because of that, we get to bring a lot of different good points to what we're doing. We get to bring different strengths. Once we align our goals, we actually get to bring the best of both worlds, as opposed to there being friction and fighting.
Yeah. Being able to have open conversations and talk transparently about points of view, I think, is something that may be hard for a lot of people to do, right? Because being transparent within inappropriate limits, of course. Some people go too far the other way, kind of in that whole virtuous view that we talked about earlier. But being able to be transparent with perspectives and the company strategy, and here's why we're making the decisions that we're making, right? Being able to open that up, I think, invites empathy in a way where you're explaining where you're coming from and why, and almost inviting somebody in, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And that vulnerability is hard, because that is what that is. You're being vulnerable and opening this up and saying this is why. But I think this brings us right back to the trust factor that we were talking about earlier. Because if I understand your point of view and I understand where you're coming from and why, I'm going to trust your decisions a lot more than if they just seem to be pulled out of thin air and make no sense at all. Because empathy at its very best works in both directions. And our leaders, with everything that they're dealing with right now, need empathy as much as anybody else. Absolutely.
I think that's a great place to put the exclamation point on the conversation here on empathy. I think I really enjoyed it. And as I said to you last time we spoke, I could geek out on this for hours, just diving into the different areas here that we started to tiptoe around some of them today. So, Dr. Melissa, as we look at the next few months, what exciting projects or things do you have coming up?
So within the next year, I'm actually hoping to have my Center for Empathy and Leadership Innovation. And I'm really excited. That's going to be a big lift, but I think we need it. And it'll allow me to continue my research. It will allow me to be able to continue on with leaders. It'll give a place, hopefully someday, a physical place where, people could actually come together in a think tank kind of way. I'm really excited about that. I'm hopeful. And in the meantime, I'm finishing up my dissertation on the second doctorate. So I'm really hoping to kick that to the curb sooner rather than later.
That's fantastic. You are either really determined or a glutton for punishment. I don't know which one of the two.
Probably a little bit of both. And not
second doctorate.
Right. not quite right.
No, it's awesome when you've got something that you're passionate about like this, and really carrying the torch and leading the way for others, especially in a time where so much is turning tech and digital, which is the opposite direction naturally of empathy and connection, of being able to merge those two worlds together. I think the importance is just going to continue to grow. So I'm glad that we've got people like you that are really focused on those areas and helping others to kind of learn those skills that maybe they don't have naturally, but can be worked on and to continue to grow.
Well, and thank you. I appreciate you having me on, because that's the thing. I am passionate about it, and I do want to talk about it, because I think when people hear it and they actually understand what I'm talking about, as opposed to this fluffy, puppies and rainbows kind of thing that empathy has a reputation for being, I think the more people in leadership positions or any kind of sales or entrepreneurship, would look at it and go, yeah, that's really the missing ingredient. And that's the thing that's going to allow me to excel. But it's a matter of being able to get that out there and talk to people. So, being able to have this kind of conversation with you is priceless, Rich. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. And if people want to get a hold of you or follow you, how do they do that?
So the best place to find me is on my website, and that's EQVIA, and that's V as in Victor, IA, empathy.com. And if you go there, you can find my TEDx, which we're at almost 150,000 views in 4 months. So, obviously
that's
there's
awesome.
something
Congratulations.
there. Thank you. Then you can find that there. My book is there. The audiobook version just came out, so we're moving ahead on that. You can contact me. I do speaking. I do keynotes. I do workshops. And anything interesting that's new gets put right there.
Excellent. So that's EQViaempathy.com.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right. Well, we will include the links to that, your book, the TEDx talk as well in the show notes too, so that everybody can just jump straight to it as well. But Dr. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great having you.
Thank you. The pleasure's all mine.
Thanks for joining us on the Mid-Game Mindset. If today's episode sparked a new idea or helped shift your perspective, share it with someone who's ready to grow. Subscribe, leave a review, and keep playing the game. With the right mindset, the best moves are still ahead. Until next time, keep changing the game.